in my new book about the four American writers and the Civil War centennial, it has caused me to think, inevitably, to think about now the Sesquicentennial. I mean, the reason I did this book on Robert Penn Warren, Bruce Catton, Edmund Wilson, and James Baldwin was in part because I was fascinated by all four of them as writers, and I've always wanted to dig deeper into Robert Penn Warren and dig deeper into Edmund Wilson and Baldwin and so on. But I found it a way of looking at the 100th anniversary of the Civil War, which was going on in the 1950s and 1960s, as a way of thinking then about, so where are we today as we now confront this 150th anniversary? Why are we so anniversary conscious in this country? And if we are, what has changed in 50 years about our understandings of that event, either in academic history or in the public memory or in schooling or in our politics? And now we live in a time of constant media, 24/7, cable news, the internet, where everybody can be a historian. Every politician has a story to tell that's historical. Bloggers every day on the internet are doing history. History is everywhere, and everybody can be their own historian. And so there's this kind of roiling historical conversation going on in the United States, whether the issue is immigration, whether the issue is race, whether the issue is, well, we have a black president, what does that mean? Or whether the issue is health care, Social Security, name your major issue. The role of government, let's be even more general. The place of the federal government vis-a-vis the states in the United States. You cannot discuss that question, that ubiquitous American constitutional question of federalism, without, if you have any sense of history, without reflecting back to the Civil War. I mean, of course the Civil War had a lot to do with states' rights, but it was states' rights employed for a particular purpose. It was state sovereignty used for a particular aim. So today, when we have politicians who are currently using the language of states' rights, state sovereignty, we have politicians now who are even using the language of nullification. The governor of Texas, a congressman from Virginia, from South Carolina, from many places, have been arguing that too much power has gone to the federal government. In fact, it's become a political mantra in this country that the federal government is too strong, too powerful, that we must reduce it, reduce it, reduce it, reduce it. Well, again, this is why the past matters. The federal government has been growing in significance and power, frankly, since the American Civil War. The Civil War ushered in a centralized federal government like never before for a whole set of obvious and important reasons. The Progressive era enhanced and grew the federal government even more because there was no other institution to try to blunt the ravages of industrialization and urbanization that were going on in the late 19th and early 20th century except government. Then we get the Great Depression, and what happens with the Great Depression? But the whole economy collapsed. The whole economic infrastructure collapsed. How do you rebuild? Well, there was no private money to rebuild with, so Keynesian economics was used, and we had something called the New Deal, which reshaped the United States forever. But now we've had a conservative politics. We've had a politics of reaction, if you like, in this country for at least the last 40 years that has systematically tried to dismantle that New Deal. So, in other words, any issue in the present, whether it's immigration, the role of government, health care, you name it, has a history. Social Security has a history. There are those of us who believe it's a moral right, it's a moral duty of government to provide some kind of network or structure to support people in old age. I mean, it's become a basic liberty of industrial modern nations across the world. And yet the United States is still debating whether that's even a right to have. Most countries in the world, most advanced countries in the world, have some form of national health insurance. We're still debating whether that's a right. That's because of our history. It's always rooted somehow in our past. So, in writing about how Americans faced the meaning of the Civil War at the Centennial is a way of coming now to our own time and asking, so how are we filtering or seeing or processing our own great debates today through this past? And you can take your pick, whether it's states' rights or whether it's race, or how we still have such a devil of a time in this country even talking about the problem of slavery. America had, at the time of the Civil War, the most successful, the most powerful, the richest, and almost the largest system of slavery on planet Earth. American slaves in 1860 were worth approximately $3.5 billion as a financial asset. That was the single largest financial asset in the entire American economy. It was central to the functioning of the American economy. And yet we still have Americans who cannot seem to face the idea that that war was actually about slavery, and Southerners seceded, struck out for their own independence to try to preserve a slave society. We have a historical narrative in the United States where some people just cannot somehow fit that story into it. And here we are at the 150th anniversary of this, and we're still having that debate. The present is always there in any discussion of the past. And at times one does get frustrated because, as everyone knows, historians, trained historians, are by far not the strongest voice. I mean, we'd like to think we are, but of course we're not. We're not the strongest voice out there in forging these public memories. The stronger voices are politicians, filmmakers, and these days, forms of media. And our task, of course, is not only to write our books. I mean, that has to be our first task. It's the thing we're best at. And to teach our courses and to give our public lectures. We have to do the things we're best at as trained historians. But we also have to find ways to use our voices out in these new major forms of media to engage these debates, because otherwise you have a public debate over the past in America, and sometimes there's no real historian involved in that debate.